Many people, especially young people, are easily influenced by people in authority, a religious leader, a professor, a political leader, and are often misguided by virtue of their naivete, and often because they're well-intentioned and think that they're doing a good thing. We have to show them the consequences of the acts of terror, of what happens. I was in Israel, in Jerusalem, at a meeting of the Conference of Presidents at a hotel. 100 meters away, while we were being briefed by the Chief of Staff, a suicide homicide bomber blew up a bus. A bus of women going to work, going shopping, children going to school. And a few minutes later, we went outside. And Congressman Nadler happened to be with us, and the chairman of the conference then, Jim Tisch, and I. And a young colonel came up to us as we stood behind the police lines a distance away from the bus. And he said, "You have to come down." And I demurred and said, it's all right, we see it. He said, no, you have to. And he took the three of us beyond the police lines down to the scene of the bus explosion. And there are no words that can describe what we saw. When you look at your shoes and you see pieces of flesh and organs, and in the 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes it took us to get out there, they already had begun to remove the bodies. And they laid them across the street, a little distance away, and from the position we were, I could see their shoes. And I saw men's shoes, and I saw women's shoes, I saw children's shoes. And I kept thinking, what did these people do? They got on a bus to go about their normal daily lives. And somebody so filled with hatred, so misguided, so indoctrinated with this incitement that continues until today, and because governments are not held to account for the incitement that is broadcast on their media, that their leaders say, that goes on in their mosques, that goes in other religious institutions, again, any violence, any extremism of this kind has to be checked. To experience it, there are no words to describe the power, the devastation, the smell, the feeling of seeing firsthand what this terrorism really is about. To think of all the families that will never be the same afterwards. People saw it in Mumbai. They saw it in many other places. How many families from 9/11 will never be healed? Time does not do away with the consequences of these acts of terror. And the only thing I could think of was to go to the hospital to visit the wounded. And so an hour later we did. And we saw young children. We saw a 95-year-old man who was a survivor of the Holocaust, who had walked away from the scene of the bus not knowing the back of his head had been badly damaged. In fact, part of it blown off. And he said to us, he grabbed my hand and he held it as best he could and said, "Don't let this dissuade you. Don't let this stop you from coming. I want to lead your next tour at a museum where he acts as a docent." We cannot let terrorism dissuade us. We cannot let terrorism dictate what we do and don't do. The security measures are vital, and we have to learn to live with them and to exercise them and to implement them in our schools, in our institutions, in our communities, and in our families. We have to educate people what to do. Once, God forbid, something happens, it's too late. What we need to do is to train people now, and they can go to scnus.org, the organization, Secure Community Network that we've established, which gives them guidelines for every institution, synagogues, churches, mosques. Everybody can go there, learn how to deal with a terrorist incident. And particularly, I believe schools have to do so. And for individual families, steps that they can take in order to be able to respond and to spare life and to deter, even if we can't prevent terrorism. And then government has a responsibility. Our government has acted effectively, more and more effectively, against many of these terrorist operations. People don't know how many trials are going on in the United States, let alone in Europe, every single day against those who engage. And if they would read the transcripts of these trials, of any one day of the trials that went on in Dallas recently, the Hoenlein Foundation in Chicago and elsewhere, across the United States, big cities and small, believe me, if they would read it, they would understand how serious the threat is. If we closed 500, there are probably 5,000 that we haven't. And so all of us have a responsibility. And it starts with creating a mindset that takes this issue seriously, that builds a resolve to act on it and then implements.